Two great countries of the East, peace-loving and industrious, today confront each other in unhappy strife. China, an immense land, about 1.5 times the size of the United States, with some 400 million people, and Japan, a little smaller than France, with 70 millions. Whereas the whole Japanese nation, united under its enlightened emperors, has developed a modern and well-organized state, the great but unhappy Chinese nation has seen nothing but strife, civil war, and anti-foreign agitation since the revolution, when the Manchu Empire of the Qing crumbled under the push of Sun Yat-sen, who had hoped to bring liberty, peace, and democratic government to his country. From 1925 to 1928, British and Americans were specially chosen as targets of anti-foreign attack. In Canton, Hong Kong, Hankow, Nanking, and Shanghai, they felt the fury of the Chinese nationalists. These aggressive actions were then turned towards Japan, finally reaching Manchuria and threatening to destroy her vital interests in that land. The Japanese living there were subjected to the most grievous oppression and injustices, and in many cases deprived of their very means of livelihood. In an effort to unify the country under their personal domination, the Chinese leaders continued to intensify their anti-Japanese agitation. It is truly the first time in history that hatred was adopted as the basic motive power of a national policy. Taught in the school books for children, spread by posters, pamphlets, newspapers, and drilled into the minds of soldiers, mind you, as a national policy. Firm in their belief that the path of both nations lies in understanding and cooperation, the Japanese have spent large sums in China on establishing hospitals, research institutions, libraries, and schools, such as the Tung Wen College in Shanghai, an institute founded by the father of the present Prime Minister, Prince Conway, and which the Chinese soldiers burnt to the ground. When hatred has been intensified to such a degree, it needs but a small spark to ignite a great explosion. That is what happened near Peking on July the 7th, when Chinese soldiers fired on Japanese at Lu Kao Kiao, near the bridge commonly called Marco Polo Bridge, because that great traveler mentions it in his tales of adventure. The Japanese command and the heads of hate against Japan, instilled in the troops by the Nanking leaders, prevented a peaceful settlement. Time after time, the Chinese broke their promises, although an agreement reached on July the 9th seemed to have settled matters. Indeed, owing to the quietness of the situation, the Japanese cabinet ministers had even left the capital for the weekend. But the Nanking government, convinced that the time had come to take action, decided to send large forces to the north in the hope of defeating the Japanese. Still, the Japanese command did not abandon hope of a peaceful settlement, but owing to a treacherous attack on Japanese military trucks and cars at the Kwang-Ang Gate of Peking, which they were entering after an understanding reached with the Chinese. Military operations became inevitable if the lives and property of the Japanese residing in North China were to be safeguarded. Leaders of the Japanese nation were called together in conference at the Prime Minister's residence. The situation was explained fully to them by members of the government, including Mr. Hirota, the foreign minister. The Diet convened and then responded as one man to the appeal of the government made by the Prime Minister, Prince Konoe. The delayed Japanese reinforcements were then sent to China. Meanwhile, a fierce anti-Japanese clamor had arisen throughout China, and the Japanese government, in order to avoid clashes in other parts of the country, took a momentous decision. It ordered all the Japanese in the interior of China to abandon the businesses and enterprises they had built up through years of toil and sacrifices, and to return to Japan. All the Yangtze ports from Chongqing, Hankow to Wuhu and Xinjiang were abandoned. Steamer after steamer left, bearing the Japanese residents and consular officials, while the foreign warships anchored in the Huangpu, prepared for any eventualities. In Shanghai, Japanese, Chinese and foreign sentiment had risen to fever pitch at the murder on August the 9th near the Hunjiao airfield by Chinese special police of a Japanese naval officer and a sailor on inspection duty. A joint inquiry showed the Chinese allegation that the victims had tried to force their way into the airfield to be untrue. For some months previously, Chinese troops had filtered into the area surrounding Shanghai, which they were forbidden to enter by the truce agreement signed in 1932 between China and Japan, and countersigned and witnessed by the United States, Great Britain, France and Italy. At the time of the murders, Chinese special police and the troops had closed in, surrounding the section where lived most of the Japanese. In the minds of all was the gruesome massacre which had just been enacted in Tungchao, a small city in North China. On July the 28th, during the night, 200 men, women and children, herded out of their homes, set ablaze by Chinese soldiers, were tortured and butchered in cold blood. Japan's leaders were naturally haunted by the fear that this might occur again, but on a far greater scale in Shanghai. As more Chinese troops rushed toward Shanghai, the alarmed foreign powers proposed to neutralize the city. But the Chinese were bent on forcing Japan to fight in Shanghai in order to divert her troops from the north and to entangle her with the foreign powers. So they rejected all these proposals and attacked the Japanese on August the 13th. The next day, Chinese warplanes appeared over Shanghai and dropped bombs in the very heart of the international settlement and the French concession. The Palace and Cathay hotels on the busy Nanking Road were among the buildings hit. The bombs killed over 1,000 and wounded more than 1,400 Chinese and foreigners alike. For a whole day, Chinese warplanes bombed at will. The civilian population fled in thousands from the exposed areas. The Japanese sailors, amidst the terrible fires caused by Chinese bombs, began a 90-day and night struggle to stave off the onslaught of China's crack divisions, whose victory would have spelled the doom of international Shanghai. Back in Japan, The whole nation answered the Chinese challenge. Mobilized troops departed amid cheers and banner waving. The streets were lined with children waving flags. The women also did their part. Patriotic societies sent their members to pour out tea for the thirsty soldiers and to fill their water bottles. Contributions for comfort bags were collected in every part of the country. These were filled with clothing, cigarettes and sweets by the eager hands of little boys and girls. Out on the main thoroughfares, all classes of society, from cafe waitresses to ladies of the court, put their stitches to the 1,000-stitch girdles which were being sent to the men in the firing line. Gifts in money and kind poured into the War Office and Admiralty, brought by young and old. The temples were visited by throngs praying for a speedy end of the fighting and the re-establishment of true friendly relations with China. For there was no hate against China. There was no war fever or violence. Chinese shops remained open. Chinese children still received their daily lessons in Chinese schools in Japan and continued to play with their little Japanese friends. Meanwhile, warships and transports steamed up the Wampu River to Shanghai, where men, horses, tanks and provisions were being unloaded. China, behind the soldiers' advance, life was pursued as usual. The Japanese troops had to care for the destined Chinese population, robbed by the retreating soldiery. Hungry children soon learned that other big children from over the sea would give them some of their rice or even sweets. Long rows of famished peasants waited, basket in hand, for the food the troops were only too willing to give them. Old Granny gets her cigarette too. Work in the fields could at last be resumed and the neglected crops be harvested. And after a hard fight, a soldier would, with respect, honor the memory of a valiant foe. Behind the campaign of hate against Japan was the scheming mind of the Moscow Comintern, intent on spreading its influence over China. Under instructions from the Red International, the Chinese Communists had ceased their armed opposition to Chiang Kai-shek and cleverly taken the lead in the agitation against Japan. The Red Imperialism was using Chinese warlords to further its plans, endeavoring to throw the masses of China and Japan against each other. It is in order to stop this powerful evil that Japan's soldiers and sailors have been giving their lives for real, everlasting peace in Asia. Prince Conway speaks for the nation.
さらに日本の安全の見地からのみならず、広くは正義人道のために、特に東洋100年の体系のために、これに一大鉄槌を加えまして、直ちに抗日勢力のよってもって立つところの根源を破壊し、徹底的実物教育によってその真意を創出してしまい、しかる後において シナの健全分子に活路を与えました。これと手を握って不行天地に恥じらう東洋平和の恒久的組織を確立するのを必要に迫られてきたのであります。
Although her soldiers and sailors have been thrown into the turmoil of battle, Japan is fighting not in hatred or for conquest, but for something much more fundamental, the establishment of order and security in China, which means a brighter and happier future for both countries. Against its will, the Japanese nation has been drawn into this conflict. Its leaders have, to the last, tried to avoid it. But the policy of hate pursued by the Chinese politicians, with the support of red imperialism, has warped the whole relationship between the two nations. The seeds of fear and hatred of Japan have been willfully sown in the hearts of the Chinese people. But this cannot last forever. By their present action, the Chinese leaders raised the issue. The Japanese people have the grim determination to see it finally solved. For that, they are ready to give all that is asked of them, even to their sons. But Japan is firm in the resolution that her sacrifices must not be made in vain. The bugles have sounded, but the Japanese nation is determined that they shall sound the royal march of peace. Out of the tempest must come peace, real peace, in heart as in fact. So again the wind will carry women's carefree laughter and children's happy prattle, the sounds of selling and buying in the busy marketplaces. Even today, behind the Japanese lines in North China, lazy, happy dreams can again be enjoyed, and children make merry on their way to school. So again, North China is resuming its industrious way to prosperity, by harmonious cooperation and understanding. But this process must go further. A way back must be found to the century-long relations of mutual respect, friendship and goodwill between the people of China and Japan. These alone can ensure enduring peace and happiness to the peoples of East Asia.